Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, fear not, there will be an intro, but before I get to the episode in full, I just want to preface it a little bit by saying that this is a very special episode. This is what is left of my abandoned masterpiece, Neolithically Delicious. This is what was part one of what was going to be a 2 or perhaps 3-part series that I ended up abandoning because the story was so huge and I didn't feel I was doing it justice. But before coming back for what I'm going to consider season 3 of Mud City, I realized I really wanted to do something that tied everything that I had been looking at this whole time together in a neat little package before moving forward, because so much of it is connected. And so while I was starting to get that process together, I came across a folder that had what remains of that video, and so I thought it would be fun to share it with you while I try to organize some thoughts. I don't know how long it's going to be before I get back to it in full swing. You know, things are very different around here this year. But I wanted to thank you guys, everybody who regularly watches my show and supports me and everything. So this is for you guys. You know, I don't know how long it's going to be up, but the episode itself, Neolithically Delicious, which is really abandoned, it's not finished, right, begins while I was doing Master of Reality. And so I was investigating the history of glass windows and houses and stuff, and I came to a site that listed the history of human settlement back to the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras. And so it was while researching that I came to Çatalhöyük, which has now become my white whale. And so hopefully by putting this out there, it'll help me finish the story later on, because it really is an amazing story that I did see through to the end. I was just having problems getting all the elements together in a cohesive enough package for me. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this. I had a whole lot of fun bringing it to you. Right? So, and remember, you know, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lie. And so without further ado, Neolithically Delicious Part 1, as it would have been presented back in February. Cheers, guys. Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Bats, and this is Neolithically Delicious. Okay. All right, so the flavor, the tastiness, it all begins with Çatalhöyük. And this is Çatalhöyük. And Çatalhöyük has been kicking my butt for over a week now, trying to get this story straight. Every take I do derails, but it's a big story, and one I want to do right. So I'm setting up my video today. I'm doing my little read-through. I'm trying to catch that wave. This is going to be the one. This is the take that's going to take it to the end. Right? And I'm reading along. I'm like, wait a minute. Something's not right. Something's happened. It's changed. And so this is what I mean. I caught the gatekeepers in the act. Here we go. And I want you to pay attention to the date, right? This is today. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Çatalhöyük gave me the best Valentine of all. So, and then it says here that what Çatalhöyük is this Neolithic, Chalcolithic proto-city, Proto-city, in southern Anatolia, which existed from approximately 7100 BC to 5700 BC. All right, today, February 14th, 2020. Now, this is a bit of a take I did a couple days ago. Do I have the date on it? Here we go, on the 11th. I did this one. All right, derailed. So we're about the 25th minute, just completely fell apart. 16 seconds in, right? The main page, right? It's a Neolithic and Chalcolithic proto-city settlement in southern Anatolia, which existed from when? Approximately 7500 BC. Wait a minute, what? This is, February 11th, 2020. Here we are, February 14th, 2020. You scroll all the way down. This page was last edited on the 12th, 2020. Now listen to this. This is what I've been barking this at my computer for days, trying to get it right, okay? All right, and it says here, and I think it's interesting also, that the bottom layer of buildings can be dated as early as 7100 BC. And the top layer, it's 5600. So again, more inconsistency. What is it? Is it 7500? Is it 6700? Is it 7100? I mean, get your story straight here, people, a little bit. I mean, it's been... I've been riffing on that line at my computer all week, since Monday, really. I've been working at this one, 30, 40 takes abandoned on this one. It cannot be a coincidence that I've been barking that at my computer all week, and they changed it. They changed it on the 12th. Unbelievable, to match what it says. I wonder if did they change the... Oh, no, they still didn't change it. I was yelling at them because they have it here at 6,700, and here they had it at 7,500, and that's an 800-year difference, which I thought was not a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence. But okay, so after I realized that, I was, okay, this is it. This is going to be the take. Because what I decided, it's been kicking my butt from a perspective point of view, how I want to layer in the information that came to me. And so I want to start by talking about, when I first read about Çatalhöyük, I had the most basic of understanding about what Neolithic man was. To me, it was pretty much everything that's reinforced in popular culture. I mean, one of my favorite movies as a teenager was Iceman. I couldn't tell you how many times I watched this movie when I was a teenager. And it really did inform a lot of what I believed Neolithic man to be like. You know, and then, again, they did talk about it in world history, but again, for a minute, you know, was not the focus of our world history class. And I think that, you know, if you're in Gen Pop, like if you're not an anthropologist or an archaeologist or something like that, or somebody who's studying those things, or don't have a really keen interest in ancient history, if you're just a member of Gen Pop, you're only gonna have this, you know, rudimentary understanding of what our past is, you know, reinforced through popular culture. You know, today we have the Geico caveman and things like that, and you know, but when we were, at least when I was young, you know, we had the Flintstones, right? And we had BC, things like that. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this. And we had, you know, like exhibits in museums. Like if you were to go to natural history museums, like the Smithsonian or the one in New York, or like when I was a kid, they had Peabody in New Haven for the Yale University. So I wanted to find one to show, right? And this is what came up. And you know, I look at this picture first, I'm like, he looks like Jim Carrey. This Neanderthal man, or not Neanderthal, this Neolithic man. Or maybe even he's got a little Bryan Cranston-y thing happening in here too. All right, and they have, let's see over here, but they don't really have any good pictures of the exhibit, or what the exhibits were like. Here they have like this is a house, as they say, how they built their houses. But this is what's reinforced in us as we all visit these museums in high school or take our kids to and so forth, and you know what we see on TV. Right, that's what Neolithic man is. Graduated from hunter-gathering, and they created agriculture, farming, and have started to build houses and things like that, permanent settlements. The dig at Çatalhöyük doesn't really do much to work away from this narrative at all. They pretty much keep with it. And so we're going to talk about Çatalhöyük later. And one thing I wanted to mention about this exhibit real quick is that this guy is he's the star of Stonehenge's new 27 million pound modern visitor center. There's your history and industry in action. You know, they're banking on this exhibit. You know, they invested 27 million pounds, and when they did this in 2013, I think it was, you know, I bet 27 million pounds is over 40 million American. I wouldn't be surprised at the time. You know, big business, Neolithic man can be in UNESCO's hands. Okay, moving right along, because thinking about that and understanding, it's like, God, you know, why is it that my understanding of the Neolithic man is so sparse? You know, as someone who has an interest in ancient history. And when I was looking at the dates that they have for Çatalhöyük, you know, it made me think of when I was actively looking at this stuff as a younger man. You know, I was reading, you know, of course I had read Zechariah Sitchin and Graham Hancock and things like that. This was some of the dates that they were putting in. It was like fringe dates. You know, but again, also really sort of blinded by the Bronze Age. That's where all the bling is, right? I mean, that's where all your ancient civilizations that we look at, you know, Egypt, you know, Sumeria, all this writing, religion and history, government are well formed, and that's where that's all our biblical history and archaeology is from what they call the Bronze Age. So I figured, all right, well, let's take a look at what the gatekeepers want us to know about what Neolithic was or meant. Right? And so this is what they tell us, right? It's the final division of the Stone Age, which began about 12,000 years ago, when farming appeared, or 10,000 BC, right? And this is the type of thing that Çatalhöyük is, and like I said, I'm going to get into all of that. Again, the whole thing reads like an encyclopedia article should read about this. It tells us when they started the earliest times for these communities and things like that. How they classify them with pre-pottery and pottery and their locations and where they found this stuff, and I'm going to talk all about that too. But how do we know about this? Who told us this stuff? So the term was coined by the Sir John Lubbock in 1865 as a refinement of the three-age system. So, okay, what's the three-age system? And it's just, it's the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, how we know it today, right? These divisions in history for archaeology's sake and anthropology, all right? And it was an idea that was put forth by this C.J. Thompson, who is director of the Dutch Royal Museum. And I love that he looks like Buddy Hackett. So he does this, and he's working for the museum, and he's got all these artifacts that they're digging up. And he wants to classify them, right? And so he comes up with this three-tiered system, the stone, the bronze, and the iron age. Right? And he publishes his theory in 1836. What's important to understand here is that archaeology at this time is a really new thing. And so here we go with the history of archaeology a little bit. I'll try to be as quick as I can, but I love that the root of archaeology is archon. And so archaeology is the study of human activity, primarily through the recovery and analysis of material culture. And the word archaeologist doesn't first appear in any dictionary until 1824. That's how late the discipline starts. And for the most part, they talk about how archaeology is what they call antiquarianism. And they never really developed the discipline until, coincidentally enough, like the mid-1600s, when all the scientific revolution is happening, and they're laying the paperwork and the groundwork for the polymaths and the machines that they're going to create, which directly control how our lives are lived today, or that they use to control our lives as we live them today. And so it says, so a very influential figure in the development of the theoretical and systematic study of the past through its physical remains was the, in quotes, the prophet and founding hero of modern archaeology, Joachim Winkelmann. Wink, wink. I know how many. It's unbelievable. We got Winky coming out of Hollywood. We got Winkelmann, who is the most influential figure in the development of the theoretical system. It's just unbelievable. When all of this stuff was starting to come together was like the mid-1700s. And I think about the types of things that were happening at that time, especially with the British Empire and, and the colonization of America, and, what the goal of that could have been and probably is still. With archaeology and that type of thing being a very new science, for Sir John Lubbock in 1865 to coin the terms paleo and neo, and thinking about how, the colonization of the U.S. starts in the early 1600s. By the mid-1600s, we have the Royal Society. By the mid-1700s, we have already the optical lenses and spectroscopy and astronomy getting underway. And sure enough, by the mid-1700s, we have archaeology getting underway. Definitely, I don't know if it's just me or not, but I definitely see the agenda building here, through the Royal Society and what they decide science and history should be. And what are they doing with that history? Because if we're living in a false paradigm, what's false about it? Are they hiding something that was there and creating a false narrative for it so we don't know what we're looking at? Or are they creating one out of whole cloth for some other reason? I don't know. But when you're looking at them trying to create this agenda of the science, and talked a little bit about that going back, the creation of the Holy Ghost of science, right? And now history, the Holy Ghost of knowledge. If you're creating this false paradigm of one of, and any one of the infinite paradigms, and that's the thing that I love about, the practitioners, the very vocal and angry practitioners of scientism, is they seem to neglect the fact that their very science says that there are infinite possibilities. And so how do they know? How do they understand that the possibility that they're living in isn't one where they're wrong? I mean, it could be. It's a possibility. Why be so angry at people who think differently than you? I don't understand. But if you're gonna create a false narrative to feed to new populations you're creating because you got a bunch of empty buildings hanging around from some catastrophe, and you're using the history to cover the fact that, there was another culture there. If you're creating that false history, you need to create beginnings for them, and you need to create things for them to believe in. You need to create a narrative that subconsciously placates our minds into accepting the modern world and being comfortable in it. It explains how we have these things. Something nice and tidy, and using the artifacts perhaps of what was recovered. But the story is all theirs to control. If you control the knowledge, you control the power. And they use the university system to spread that power, right, and control the history and the science. And so I don't think it's a coincidence then that, this Sir John Lubbock coins the term Neolithic, meaning New Stone Age, in 1865. Which is, shortly after we start getting that, the exhibitions start coming into play and they start defining what life is like for modern man, and the general public. And so what other fingerprints can we find on this? Because not only is this, right after all the exhibitions start coming into play, but it's also around the time where they start really building that division between science and religion. What can we find out about Sir John Lubbock? And so there he is, right? First Baron Avebury, fourth Baronet. He served on the Privy Council, right? And he was a member, of course. He was a fellow of the Royal Society, but he was also a deputy lieutenant. And I don't know about you, but when I think of the word lieutenant, I think strong arm. Right? He was an English banker, of course he was, liberal politician, philanthropist, scientist, and polymath. And he worked with his family company. His family, he comes from a banking family, rich guy all the way, right? But he makes significant contributions to archaeology, ethnography, several branches of biology, and he coins the terms Paleolithic and Neolithic to denote the Old and New Stone Ages. He also introduced the first law for the protection of the UK's archaeological and architectural heritage. So here we find, really the very beginnings of what UNESCO will turn into, and the very beginnings of legislating the past, and making sure that it's the version of the past that the government wants going forward, right? And he was a founding member of the X Club. The X Club. And so the X Club was a dining club of 9 men who supported the theories of natural selection and academic liberalism in the late 19th century England. Right? It was initiated by Thomas Henry Huxley, and that's him over here. Right? And he called the first meeting on the 3rd of November, 33. Right? And the club met in London once a month, except in July, August, and September, meaning that they met 9 times a year. And I think 9 members, they meet 9 times a year, but it's called the X Club, and X could be the Roman numeral for 10. So it makes me curious as to who is the invisible 10th member. Again, these men were devoted to championing Charles Darwin in the theory of natural selection and evolution, and making sure that that was what went forward academically over creationism. These guys are the ones who did it, and they had help. And that help comes in the form of astronomer and polymath John William Draper, a British expat living in America. And I'm going to talk about him in great detail in a future episode of Master of Reality. He presents his paper on the intellectual development of Europe at the 1860 Oxford Evolution Debate in support of Thomas Henry Huxley. And not only that, he's the author of The History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science, which popularized the conflict thesis, proposing intrinsic hostility in the relationship between religion and science. And what this does is it helps bolster the cause of agnosticism. And of course, agnosticism being the mechanism that Huxley and his ex-club cronies like Lubbock used to try to sell their Royal Society approved science and technology to the masses. Right? Like I said, if they're trying to create all this new technology, if they want to separate and create a third option for people aside from the two religions that they've set up in the Western world, you need a new origin story, right? And especially if it's one that could potentially be misdirecting you away from your true origins. And so let's look at, we're going to bounce around here a little bit, right? So I'm going to look at Lubbock briefly, right? Again, he comes from a rich family. When he was young, during 1842, his father brought home a great piece of news. Charles Darwin was moving to Down House in the village, so right in the neighborhood. But the youth, Lubbock, was soon a frequent visitor to Down House and became the closest of Darwin's younger friends. And when I read that, I was like, of course, we have the modern prism today and our world is so sick and twisted. I was like, do you think Darwin favored young boys? That's kind of what I picked up from that, But this guy was under the influence of Darwin and these theories from a very young age. And he goes on to form this X Club, all right, which was founded by Thomas Henry Huxley. Now let's look at him real quick. He was also a member of the Privy Council. Again, close to the king or queen, right? He was a fellow of the Royal Society, the Scottish Royal Society as well, and he was whatever this is, of the Linnean Society, right? But he was known as Darwin's bulldog in the theory of evolution. And he took part in this famous debate, which really, I guess, helped win some of the scientific community over to the idea of evolution and natural selection. And someday I'll do an episode about evolution. But the thing about him, not only is he the loudest and strongest armed proponent of evolution, he is grandfather to Aldous Huxley, writer of Brave New World, who died on November 22nd, 1963. Look at that. You get 33 out of that. And 1963, you get your 3 6s. That's pretty cool. I didn't really look at that first. Right? But, what did Aldous Huxley write? He wrote Brave New World, which, of course, talks about a genetically modified and programmed humanity. And that's what the end result of this spectroscopy really is becoming, with gene therapy and so on and so forth. His grandfather, the foremost, the strongest armed proponent for the theory of evolution. But not only that, Aldous Huxley's brother, also the grandson of Thomas, is this Julian Huxley. And Julian Huxley just happens to be the first director of UNESCO. Right? His grandfather's best friend introduces the first law of protection for ancient sites. And that goes straight to the founding of UNESCO. And I'm going to do a video about UNESCO someday too. But none of that can be a coincidence, especially when, you have the sort of slant, the idea that our history is being directed for us. I mean, that stuff just can't be a coincidence. And I know, my adrenaline is surging like crazy, and I hope my ideas are going to come across making sense, because now we're going to start talking about Çatalhöyük and what Çatalhöyük is. And this story is amazing. And here it is after its first round of excavations, and we're going to talk about that. And here's its location on the map in Anatolia. When they talk about that it was a UNESCO World Heritage Site, they mentioned that it was done in July of 2012. I looked it up. It happened to be done on July 2nd, which is a 7 and a 2, which you could get a 9 out of. And it just so happened that it was designated during the 36th session of UNESCO. The numerology, the gematria here is a lot of fun. One thing I also want to, before I get any further with this, is now, as I was mentioning, they brought the field of archaeology into the academic process in the mid 1800s. And they put forth this idea of Paleolithic and Neolithic man. Well, what did they have on record at that time to put these theories forward? So I wanted to find a list of Neolithic settlements. So here's a list of them, right? And I'm just going to scroll through it real quick. And they all have the same kind of time frame on it, of course, right? That's what they want. And now the thing about this list, and I'm going to go over it again now that I've scrolled through it. It's a pretty big list, right? I don't know how many's on it. But I looked at every single one of these on this list to find out when were they discovered. And with very few exception, they were all discovered after the 1920s. And now I did look at some Paleolithic sites as well, and some of those go into the 20s and a little bit earlier, but I didn't go that deep with them. You know, because we also know, like in the 20s and the 1800s, that's when they started to work the Bronze Age sites, Egypt and Sumer and, you know, other areas of the Levant, and also in England with the Bronze Age barrows and things like that, the Celtic Druids and stuff. So with very few exception here, I mean, Jericho is one, that was 1868. This UC in India, that was, what was that one? That was the 1830s. Gnosis, they say that was, the best I could get on Gnosis was the mid-1800s, right? And then there's one other, this Sesklo in Greece, which also they just said 1800s. Yeah, they give this one a margin of error. I didn't notice that before. 66, of course. Right? And then when they talk about the English ones, they don't, when I looked up their discovery dates or whatever, you know, they didn't really list any because to them, I guess they were always there because they start excavating those kind of early. Interesting that it's all after the 20s, and in the majority, I mean, it really picks up in the 50s and 60s, you know, and some not even until like the 90s and stuff. So it's interesting that they have just very few sort of examples to work with at that time, yet they put these ideas forward academically. You know, now this has me thinking back, because now I'm thinking about the time frame. There's like 100 years from when Lubbock here, 1865, all right, and 1965, the last year of Mellart's dig at Çatalhöyük. There's 100 years, all right, and it isn't until this time, almost 100 years later, that they really start finding these settlements. So to me, that says they have 100 years to get their story straight before all these settlements show up, and which just happen to validate those theories. So you've got like 100 years of groundwork, really, or pretty close to it. Then you start presenting these sites as evidence for your ideas, right? How are you going to get, you need the general public softened up. You want them to just accept these ideas more than anything else. That they won't question the history so much. You present it in a certain way through your museums and so forth. And before you start really unleashing these sites as evidence to support your theories of Paleo and Neolithic man and the origins of man were. But how do you get it so that the general public will buy in and treat this idea as ubiquitous to their nature, right? And what do you need to do that? Of course, you need some good old-fashioned psychological warfare, right? Because of all of these sites, as I found out, like I said, most of them were in the 60s. Let's see, it would just take me forever to go through the list, but most of them were in the 60s. And so what happens in the late 50s and early 60s? We get, as I mentioned before, the Flintstones, right? And the most beautiful aspect of the Flintstones is that it went worldwide because it could be dubbed into any language. You're implanting a subliminal image of what Neolithic and Stone Age man is into the minds of pretty much the whole world. The Flintstones was translated into, I don't know how many languages. You know, one thing that it does is it humanizes them and it makes them relatable to us, right? And not only was the Flintstones was in 1960, you know, but also at that same time, as I mentioned earlier, BC, which now when I look that up, right, it debuted in 1958, the same year that Çatalhöyük was discovered. They started doing it even a little bit earlier in the 1930s with alley-oop. You know, because what do we know is the most effective type of psychological warfare? It's pictures with captions, right? And so you're presenting your Paleolithic theory to the masses in comic book and comic strip and animation form, something that can be translated into any language, something that can be made relatable to a variety of cultures in a way that doesn't make it awkward for them, because it doesn't matter that they necessarily don't look like that, you know, because it's animated, it's cartoony. You know, with the Flintstones being translated into so many languages, you know, so was BC. And so this is Johnny Hart, right? He was the creator of BC, and he wrote and drew it until he died in 2007. You know, he's a very interesting character. He's a very Christian
person. He was referred to as the most widely read Christian of our time, over C.S. Lewis and Billy Graham. That's pretty unbelievable. That was the scope of BC because it was published worldwide and in many languages. All right, and let's look at the awards he was given. All right, he won the International Congress of Comics Award in Italy, first time for an American. And he has another great award here, too. He has the NASA Public Service Award, 1972. Well, how is an animator of BC, Neolithic, Paleolithic times, how does he get a public service award from NASA? Which is all about the future. Right? And space exploration. There's not a coincidence the way these things tie in. And what's also not a coincidence is where he lived. He lived in Nineveh, New York. And Nineveh was a hamlet of about 50 homes. So, depending on how many in a household, about 200 people, as a part of this town of Colesville in Binghamton. And it was named after the ancient city of Nineveh in Assyria. He does a comic strip about Neolithic and Paleolithic times, and he lives in a 200-person commune in Binghamton, New York, named after this ancient Bronze Age Assyrian city. I mean, that is just unbelievable. The coincidences there, or non-coincidences, as the case may be. All right, and so, I think I'm belaboring the point, but so they softened our minds with this stuff. So when they actually bring us the sites, because these things are excavated and stuff, but they're not really presented to the public for a few years yet. Where did it go? I lost my Çatalhöyük page. Çatalhöyük. And so they have some examples for the history books. They have us all nice and softened up with popular culture. And, of course, Hollywood gets in on it. This is an early effort, 1 million BC. This was produced by Hal Roach Studios, and I think it's interesting that that's the same company that brought us the Our Gang, the Little Rascals shorts. Put this one out there in 1940. But one thing that's really interesting about the inserting this Paleolithic, Neolithic man narrative into popular culture is how it subliminally bolsters and supports evolution, especially if that's what you're going to be putting forward academically. And one thing about this brainwashing campaign, the psychological warfare, especially in terms of popular culture, is how predominantly focused it is on the Paleolithic. Right? You look at Paleolithic era movies and they give you all kinds of stuff. Clan of the Cave Bear, Quest for Fire, Caveman with Ringo, right? The Croods, Ice Age. I mean, you could go through this list of movies. There's so much out there in terms of supporting Paleolithic man and caveman and things like that. And then in popular culture, it almost immediately jumps to like sword and sandal type movies, big epic Bronze Age stories and biblical stories, Cleopatra and things like that as well. Hercules, Goliath, from big budget Hollywood ones to cheapy imports and low budget B movies to flood the youth market with, because that's what it's all about. It's all about getting them when they're young, using things like the Flintstones and some of these cheap movies which could be dubbed into other languages. It really subliminally plants that base in there. And so when it comes time for the history, the academic aspect of that bridge gap between roaming around like cavemen to full civilization and Bronze Age cities, there's really not much. There's nothing there. I mean, put in movies about Neolithic era and, you get the same stuff pretty much. And the Neolithic era, between the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, really only lasts about 5,000 or 6,000 years, according to the record. So best kind of leave that one to students in academia and not really put it out there. And what people may learn from whatever science article or whatever brief news story they want to put out there to keep that narrative afloat, is already supported by all of this Paleolithic stuff. And so I just wanted to point that out and keep that a part of the story as we go forward. So let's take a look at what they actually found at Çatalhöyük. They have Çatalhöyük Research Project webpage right here. And so I think I'm going to end this one here and do two parts with it and do Çatalhöyük next. I'm very curious to see how this one's turned out. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had a whole lot of fun bringing this one to you. And until the next one, cheers, guys.